All right, it's book club. Everybody go around and introduce yourself real quick so that we can listeners who listen to this know everybody's voice. I'm Jeff, by the way.
Mary Van Everbrook.
Thanks, Mary.
I'm Faye.
I'm Sully.
And I'm Laura.
Nice. Okay, we're talking about. We can jump right back into the conversation in a second. I'd cut everybody off and hit record to make us start recording. But before we do, let's just talk about. We're talking about network effect with Martha Wells, and because I'm ancient, I have to buy a paperback copy, because ebooks and me don't currently get along. So a little bit about her. She has 37 novels on the market, which is crazy. She started publishing in 1993. Graduate of Texas A&M. She's an Aggie. We will forgive her for that. And she has won all of the awards. She's won the Focus Award, the Hugo Award, the Nebula Award, the Alex Award. She's won all of the awards. If there is a sci-fi award, she has won the award. So that's a little bit about our author, and we're reading Network Effect. So we were talking about the fact that this is the 5th book in the series, but the first full novel. In fact, I totally cut off what you were saying.
That's okay. So yeah, I'm wondering if she was going along with the novellas, and then Tor said, we want a novel. And they had to package this book to compress the previous novellas into the beginning of this story for people who hadn't read the previous stories.
So did you read the novellas before coming into this one?
I read this book first, and then I went back and read them.
Because I did not read the novellas. Do the novellas, is this a summary of the novellas at the beginning of the book?
There are lots of hints, but there's a lot more that you can get out of reading them.
Okay, cool.
And I think reading everything in order would be probably optimal, but I went back and read them later and still got a lot, like there's some moments especially in one with another AI named Mickey that was really lovely.
Nice. Is there a novella with art?
Yes.
Okay. Art is the AI. So sorry for people who haven't read the book. Art is the AI that the book is about Murderbot, who is a security unit that has learned about humanity by taking their governor off and watching streaming thousands and thousands of hours of TV. And so it is trapped on a ship with humans it's supposed to protect, being sucked into a wormhole by an alien force, and the ship is an old friend who at the first of the book is apparently dead, but we're just going to spoil things. We're just going to spoil things. Is not dead. But yeah, what were you going to say, Sully? Hi, Tom. Tom joined us.
I never actually quite got, is this character male or female, or supposed to be neither? I initially took it as female.
I think
the Murderbot character
from the previous stories, Murderbot does not want to have a gender.
Oh, okay.
And finds human sexuality quite disgusting.
Well, it's missing out.
Yeah,
it's they.
It's they.
It's referred to as they or it's through the.
Yeah, and that makes sense. They make sense, especially because it's not just Murderbot is not just the single character, but it also has 8 drones that it like sends out into the world, which are like extensions of itself, which is just a fascinating thing to happen. Yeah, so Tom and Mary, did y'all read the novellas first, or did y'all jump right into this book?
I jumped right into the book, and I think this is the first sci-fi I've read. It was, if it hadn't been for the dialogue, Murderbot, I fell in love with the dialogue, the different formats of it. That's why I stuck with the story. The story to me was very complicated. It was not your Star Trek kind of thing, in a sense. So, because that's my experience of sci-fi. So But I could get into it. I think a few things I didn't understand, but I think I'm there. I have like 20 pages left in the book. I couldn't get it done for the time, but that's okay. But I'm really, it's the character. It's the character driven, the dialogue, the internal dialogue. It's just, oh, to be able to write like that, you know?
Yeah, it's
Uh,
yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
How
that
did you
was my
like?
experience.
How'd you like your first sci-fi book?
I liked it. I did.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm gonna read. I did. I ordered. I didn't realize they were novellas, but that's okay. I ordered the novellas, and I'm wondering if any of the ones after this are full-length novels or no. Are they all novellas? There's a couple after this that she
The-
wrote.
The next one is a novella.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Okay.
I started here with book 5, and then I went back and read book 1.
Mhm.
So, and I have some, when we get to opinions, I have some thoughts on that, but
His opinions. That's really funny. How was the how for those who read earlier books, how did they compare to this one? Besides being shorter. Because I know they're novellas.
Yeah,
who-
they introduce the backstory of art and
Okay.
how Sec Unit and art meet.
Nice.
yeah, that's what I was going to say was that there were I had a couple comments that tied in with things we've been talking about that you've been talking about lately in terms of setting and such. And
Oh no, Tom froze.
one of my
There he
very
is.
few criticisms of the book. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the very few criticisms I had of the book, which I adored, was that there was more backstory info dump than needed, which I'm sure had something to do with the publisher or editor who was like, many people will be coming to this book first. You have to tell them everything that's happened. And the only times that the book bogged down for me was when they were talking about Gray Chris and all the stuff that happened with Gray Chris. And when you read the first book, which is where that happens, like, oh, okay. But like, I didn't need to know. There was nothing of that I needed to know. Which brings me to one of my other observations that I was in awe of was we've been talking about where to put in background information or other information. And in this book, because Murderbot can think about 5 things at once, it was often giving backstory on several different topics at the same time in this sort of crazy, while like sending the drones around and while talking about the shows they've been watching. It was amazingly well done. It was only when it was talking in too much depth about things in the earlier book that I felt like that she missed the mark on that. Overall, I was like, how is she doing this? So loved it.
Yeah, it felt a little bit like I don't know if y'all have ever read any Jose Saramago. He doesn't use any punctuation, and it felt a little bit like that for me, that like I really had to get. It took me until chapter 3. I marked it. It took me till chapter 3 to get into the headspace, to be like, okay, I can actually think in this way. But it took me a bit. Yeah. If there hadn't been the requirement of book club, I don't know that I would have gotten past the first chapter.
Wow.
It's amazing once you get into it. It's like the whole thing is a crowd scene, and there's like a live conversation, and there's a feed conversation with everybody, and then there's a feed conversation with someone else, and she takes you through it really well.
Yeah, and there's also her Murderbot's asides in parentheses, so she's having like 3 conversations and making like comedic asides all in one. Hey
All
Shane.
the punctuation.
Yeah, all of
Hey.
it jumped in at once. Yeah. All right, well, so let's talk about Tom. You said you loved the way that Martha Wells is giving backstory. What else did we love about the book?
Well, the narrative voice was brilliant.
Talk about the narrative voice for those who haven't read it.
Well, it's a sentient computer who is hilariously funny and also very, very grumpy, and also has past trauma, and also has a unresolved relationship with the humans that it's formerly working for, but now working with. And all those things are happening at once in a first person narration. Which I thought was first and foremost hilarious, but also touching. You know, it was like the best sci-fi where you don't really care what happens, right? You're watching Firefly. It's not necessarily how the story ends up. It's the characters, and I just love that character. I thought it was really, really unique. It could have been like Data from Star Trek, but he was nothing like Data from Star Trek.
Right.
He was nothing like any robot character I'd ever read before. I keep saying he, and I have to apologize to Murderbot because
I know we're misgendering Murderbot all over the place.
hard.
It. Murderbot is it. They. Yeah.
It.
Anybody else love anything about the character?
I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the Honeymooners, but Jackie Gleason, Norman, the two characters, Norman and Ralph, their humor was very similar to Murderbot's and the internal dialogue. So it was a flashback. It was nice.
It's funny because I was just thinking, I thought of the Honeymooners. I
Did you?
don't know why, but they're kind of like both Ralph Cramdens though.
Yep.
There's not really a Norton character. They're
Well,
both the sort of
They both, right. They're both. Yeah.
I
It's
sort of
both.
saw Art as John Goodman in my head.
John. Okay. Oh, that would be good. That would be a good pick.
That's really funny.
You gotta love computer AI voices that swear.
Say again. I still went for a run.
Sorry, I'm gonna mute. Tom is on a run, so I'm gonna mute him. Yeah, you gotta love AI voices that swear and that have that like weird emotional constipation that happens a lot with Murderbot. That weird, like I can't, for the first, half of the book, I couldn't really tell if Murderbot was feeling things or not. And then it's like, oh no, you are. They have the moment with the girl whose name starts with A that I'm gonna forget how to say, where she's actually like trying to get Murderbot to go to a therapist when all this is over. That was great. Yeah. Anything else we liked about the voice?
I like the snark.
Define snark for us, Sully.
Like the sarcasm.
Nice.
And you can tell that this it's way ahead of the humans, so it's like, come on, people, catch up.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the multiple tracks of thought going on, because after I caught on to the style, it kind of urged you to keep pace with it, and I enjoyed that.
How do we feel about the so Martha Wells uses a lot of different like writing techniques to get this first person voice across. How do we, and Shane's smiling because I know he knows I'm going to bring up italics, but how do we feel about the asides and parentheses as a technique?
I loved it.
I liked it.
I thought it was great. Yeah.
She made it, the author made it really easy to follow. Like she was incredibly consistent in how she used the different devices, I think. And so I had no trouble once, like you said, once you kind of get into the headspace, I had no trouble figuring. And if you look at it too, she bopped around in different tenses all the time, but it all totally made sense.
Yeah.
It reminded me a bit of authors who use footnotes. I know she didn't use footnotes, but like Jay Kristoff in Nevernight with the footnotes, it's that similar, like the bulleted lists and the different techniques. I thought it was handled really well.
Yeah, I like that the parentheses always, well, almost always came at the end of a thought. It's one of those things that like made it, I think, easier to latch onto, if that makes sense. Yeah. How do we feel about, so Martha Wells uses parentheses as like, I guess it's like internal dialogue, I guess you would call it, because there's internal dialogue going, and then the Murderbot has like,
Internal.
yeah, the Murderbot has like an aside on their internal dialogue, and that's what ends up in parentheses. And then there's also italics going as like intercoms between the characters, which I would like to go on record first saying like this was a really excellent use of italics. I just want to say it worked really well. Because she like by using it, she didn't have to, like Martha Wells didn't have to specify all the time that like this is being said on comms or this is being said out loud, or, and it was super consistent, which I thought was great. Yeah, so I wanted to get that out there before I got flack for railing on italics.
Yeah, along the lines of what Faye said, there's in terms of kinds of communication, the stuff in italics is largely the feed, which as far as I can tell is like something they're seeing on each other's screens. It's not even out loud.
Oh, that's interesting. That's not how I interpreted it.
And then there's comms, which are inside the like spacesuits, and then there's people actually speaking face to face. And sometimes all three of those things are going in.
Yeah.
Quite often Murderbot will send a message to one of the other crew members while they're standing in front of somebody else. He does it with Amina a lot. And it's in a way that the other person can't even tell that they're receiving a message. So my interpretation was that was some sort of electronic feed, like
I thought of it as like a
message or something.
That's interesting. I thought of it as like a closed comm, like this is only these people can hear it. But yeah, the feed makes sense too, that it's like a rolling text thing. That's interesting.
But anyway, it's a lot of balls up in the air at the same time.
Yeah, lots to manage. A lot with one character voice happening all the time. Yeah, any other thoughts on Murderbot's voice or the first person POV? What else did we like about the book?
I thought it was amazing how she developed the other characters. I cared as much for the other characters as I did for Murderbot. So it was fascinating going through the book that way and not having the experience of reading the novella, you know. Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome.
I think one of the reasons why it took me so long into the book to kind of get into it was, for me, it really wasn't immediately clear, you know, what was the point of the story. Now, I'm not sure if I just missed it or if I just, you know, if it just took a while to get to that, because it seemed pretty random at first. Anybody else have the similar?
Yeah, definitely.
And tell us more, Shane. Tell us more.
I didn't really get the plot full stop, to be honest. The characters saved the whole thing. Like the characters made it.
Agreed, yeah.
I still don't really understand the plot. I couldn't identify any plot points. I couldn't identify any particular journey. It was plot wise, it was the strangest book I think I've ever read. I just couldn't pick out the plot at all.
Right. So that implies to me that the quote unquote plot was just the telling of that particular story.
So that's
whatever
really
the story
I
was.
had
I don't know
exactly
what it
the
is.
opposite. Sorry, go ahead, Shane.
I was just going to say whatever the story actually was, because I'm still not quite sure what it was.
See, that's really funny because once they started telling the story, that's actually when I got into it. I was like, okay, like this is what I'm here for. All of the, and as the more you all talk about your experience, like with the 5 different tracks of thought and whatever, I think the reason why I had a hard time relating to it is because that's what's already happening in my head all of the time. So to read other people experiencing what I feel like is my life, which is this like, I don't understand the humans around me, but I have to play nice with them all of the time. But really, I want to be watching television and talking to, doing other things with people like me. I think seeing it come to life. Also, as I mentioned before we turned the recording on, I listened to it before I read it. And a lot of the techniques that you all are talking about the italics and the parentheticals, like I missed because I was just hearing it. The voiceover actor did an amazing job of like changing voices when different people were speaking. So that part was pretty easy for me. But I did realize that as I went back and read it, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about also I missed because it's stuff as a lazy reader I tend to skip, right? Like you give me 4 really long paragraphs, I might read the first sentence of each paragraph, but then I'm looking for the italics. I skip over anything in a parenthetical just as a general rule, which often makes reading very difficult for me. I do find that
This book was like a 5-minute read for you.
Well, that's the thing is I picked it up after I had listened to it. I was like, okay, I can just read like a couple of chapters just to figure out like the cadence of the dialogue and stuff. And I'm like looking at it and I'm scanning pages. I'm like on page 7 before I actually read anything. I was like, okay, wait, this isn't going to work. I gotta go back and actually read stuff. Yeah, I'm so really like no one should write for me personally because I just want screenplays. That's it. Just give me a screenplay with a lot of explosions, which I really appreciated about this book.
You're just waiting for the series to come out then.
Yeah,
That'd be good.
yeah. No, I found that the action scenes, despite the fact that they were disrupted by so much like thought and backstory, which is not something that I enjoy in my action scenes. Like just if you're gonna give me action, just give me action. But like you all have said, like she did it really well. So it made sense. But the action scenes worked really well for me. They were really well thought out. Murderbot followed all of Murderbot's rules all of the time. There wasn't any like, well, it happens this way in this section, but over here, they're using different rules or different protocols just because it's more convenient. So I thought the consistency of that was really good. But yeah, I really liked the storyline. I thought that it was like this kidnapping that happens that you think is happening for one reason actually turns out to be happening for a completely different reason. And the target of the kidnapping is actually a hero story instead of like I'm fighting against, which I was really in for that. So
Shay's like, there was a kidnapping.
And I'm interested. I was waiting to see what Laura said because we're not always on the same side of things. Like, boy, she's been muted a long time. The story is convoluted, but I also thought that the entire thing was action. It's also talking constantly at the same time, but it starts with an action scene, and as soon as that action scene is over, they get sucked through a wormhole, and then there's another action, and then they go down to the planet, and there's more. I mean, it does not stop moving, and at the same time, the author is just having fun with all of this character voice. It was maybe a little overcomplicated, but I didn't really care. I didn't find. And in terms of if there's an arc, I thought in this book the arc was really about Murderbot and Art. And you talk about him having emotions. If you read the first one, Murderbot's even more of a raw nerve. There's some scenes where it like goes and stands in the corner because it can't stand having to talk to someone face to face because it's not used to it, and really likes to have
it's my life story.
It really likes to have its mask down all the time, and because it doesn't want to talk to people. And so sort of his Murderbot's initial anger at Art for bringing them there and endangering his humans, and the fact that both Murderbot and Art like have genuine care for their humans, like it's job one to save those humans. I thought there was an arc there, but you know, not as strong as like a hero's journey. It was more fun. I think the book was supposed to be a lot of fun, and I had a lot of fun reading it.
Yeah, I think going back to what we were talking about with action scenes, I think in the future, when people ask me, because I get the question all the time, how do you put dialogue in an action scene? And I'll point to this book from now on, because it was the pacing of action with like using the dialogue to bring around emotional tension in the action scene was really fantastic. Now, like like Laura said, I could have done without some of the backstory in the action scenes. Like we could have pulled some of that out, but there's a lot of action scenes where like, the characters are talking through the action scene, which was great. Not just Murderbot, like all of the characters are talking through the action scene, which was really well done. And I was super impressed. I was like, yeah, this is why this thing, the POV, the like complicated POV and like the balancing of all the different voices. And then also the way Wells writes these action scenes. I think I got to like the first big action scene where they get on Art ship and, Murderbot's like trying to figure out what's going on. And they get in a fight with these two gray people. It was that action scene was just phenomenal. It was that's when I connected. I was like, oh yeah, we're doing something here. Like this is impressive.
So what I really appreciated about this book, we've been hearing recently from authors in the community who are neurodivergent, talking about how do you process and how do you think about emotion. And I think Martha Wells did a really great job of using Murderbot, who was programmed to follow routines and protocols, learning how to understand human emotion. There's a lot of like talking about the facial expressions that the people are using and what they could mean and what Murderbot's interpreting them to mean. And not being neurodivergent myself, but like kind of understanding the process of how individuals process emotion. I thought that it was a really interesting take on like, well, this facial expression could mean this, but in this case, I think it means that. That's the part of the story that I was like, that's really cool, because you've got this robot who's now trying to emulate humanity. So like seeing it from that perspective, I thought was really cool.
I absolutely agree. And also trauma, to have trauma be an issue that character is dealing with was really fascinating.
Tom, who knew that it would take Martha Wells to get you and I on the same page with a book?
I know. I'm concerned that when we hang off this call, hell is frozen over and we're all going to hear about it.
Oh, come on. It's never been that bad. It's never been that bad. But it's funny because we probably like it for very different reasons.
Yeah, probably.
I like a long paragraph where that does 5 different things. And I know you don't, but
yeah.
I can't even imagine what that would have looked like as a dialogue only first draft.
Yeah, it would have been 7 pages long. Oh.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about the writing technique, we've talked about the POV, we've talked about the plot, we've talked about the action scenes, we've talked about the trauma and neurodivergent thinking. Is anything else y'all want to bring up around the story? Anything we haven't talked about yet?
I really picked up the theme of family, where Sec Unit ends up being kidnapped with the daughter of the person that it's closest to, and it doesn't like teenagers, and still has to like look after and not let this kid die. And then the point where Sec Unit and Art come up with their rescue thing, and the kid's like, "Oh, you're having a baby." I saw the circle of that as a really interesting look at different types of families. And in Martha Wells' world, families are very diverse. So people have more than one parent. There are multiple people in marriage arrangements, and And I thought the exploration of family, although it didn't seem to be like central to the action, was a really interesting theme.
Anybody else want to jump on that one?
I would just say that I would agree. I think it was a neat, it did make it difficult for me because like this person is this person's partner and this person's parent, but this person is also that person's uncle. Finally, I was just like, okay, they're all related to each other. I don't actually care who's related to whom. I also had a hard time because they kept changing names. Like Murderbot was Sekio. Art was also had another name, which of course I can't remember now.
Perihelion.
Perihelion, thank you. Some people were calling Art Perihelion, some people were calling Art, right? Like the changing of the names, the person that Murderbot is supposed to be protecting, Murderbot refers to her by her first name, but everyone else is referring to her by her last name. But I couldn't find any place in the story where she was referred to by her title, her first name, and her last name until like chapter 7. And then I was like, okay, well, now I figured it out. So that changing of things, which I think is really realistic in real life. I feel like we code switch like that a lot in real life, but I found it hard from and again, it might be that, you know, if I had read the novellas beforehand, I wouldn't have had, or if I had been reading it instead of listening to it, I might not have had quite as difficult of a time with it. But I do agree with you, Faye, that like the family theme of like, it doesn't really matter what our relationship is. We're all looking out for each other and we're all caring for each other the same way, which I thought was really great.
I'm sorry, I keep talking, but
You don't have to be sorry for talking.
I thought there was a beautiful bit at the end where, and one of the things that's missing, some of the side characters in this, I didn't think that their voices were very strong. I thought Amina's was, but I've only read the first novella, but Mensa, who you hear about a lot, the person that he originally sort of hooked up with, and Amina is her daughter. She has a very strong voice, and I sort of missed it in this book because she's not really in it. But there's a beautiful piece at the end where one of the other characters is sort of trying to figure out Murderbot's relationship with Mensa and is jealous of it. And finally, Murderbot says, "We are teammates." And like, it gives me goosebumps right now thinking of it, because that is something that was incredibly meaningful for Murderbot in a way that none of the other relationships make sense. And I felt like that was sort of, that was an important part of the emotional arc that tied in strong with family and built family. But for Murderbot, a built family is that group of teammates. It wouldn't be a mom, dad, whatever. It just really struck me.
It's fun. Anything else we want to bring up about the book? I mean, we've had a thorough discussion about
Yes, we all
anything.
want to meet him. Meet it.
Meet it.
So I had a question for everybody else. How did you feel when the POV went from Murderbot to Murderbot's clone to then the other Sekio?
I was okay with it. I rolled with it. I mean, it was a little disruptive, but I just kind of rolled with it as a reader.
Mm-hmm.
As a writer, I don't know if I could have written that way, but I mean, as a reader, I rolled with it.
The first time I read it, the first time I changed a chapter to the new POV, I had to go back and figure out what was going on. It took me a second.
Me too.
Yeah, I didn't particularly like that. I actually thought it was distracting. And it really threw me off at first until I kind of figured out what they were doing. But yeah, I just flat out didn't like that.
Did you have a thought on it?
It didn't bother me at all. I thought it was very clever with Murderbot and Murderbot 2.0. And then when you went to SecUnit, I think that was, it was maybe a little forced for her to be able to do some of the things she wanted to do storytelling wise. But at the same time, it also showed you the progress of Murderbot in its cognitive thinking by juxtaposing someone who has just sort of had that governor removed. And you can sort of see the huge difference between, I think its name was 3, or it referred to itself as 3, and Murderbot. So it served that function as well. But narratively, it didn't bother me. It was a little bit like, oh, I need to figure out how to show this part of the story, and I don't know how to do it. But I rolled like Marion said, I just rolled.
Thank you. That validates all of my feelings that I had for it. First, I was like, what are you doing? This doesn't make any sense. You can't do this. Okay, fine. You're doing it. I'm following you. I'm in it. So I felt all the things that you all felt. I just needed to make sure that I wasn't crazy there. Thank you for validating me.
All right, what are we taking away for our own writing from this book? What are you going to try? What do you want to experiment with?
More italics all the way.
More italics. Yeah,
Italics
this book,
everywhere.
yeah, this book totally changed my opinion on italics. I'm gonna write a whole book in italics, like Cormac McCarthy, a whole thing, all italics all the time.
I think it wouldn't have worked without her incredible command of how to use all of those devices. She takes you effortlessly through all of the changes.
And her,
Yep,
like
and I
you
think-
said earlier, her intense consistency with them is what makes it work.
And I know this, but for me, it's like character, 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 character. And it makes me look at my work and be like, there's not enough character.
Yep, I'll read anything she writes about Murderbot.
And I think you hit on earlier, Jeff. For me, it was really a kind of a clear example of how to write dialogue in action.
That's it.
I mean, it was almost non-stops, and it was presented in such a way that I could understand how to see it, how to do it better. So that's going to be my next attempt whenever I get back to writing.
Nice.
That's how I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it to learn. I mean, you had mentioned it, I think, in one of your podcasts, Jeff, when you were going over somebody's work. But it's that in between of the dialogue. You just can't have straight dialogue. You have to have the facial expressions, the movements, and I think this book is an excellent resource for me to try and learn some of that.
Awesome. All right, final thoughts. We recommend this book for people to read. We don't. Everybody's giving thumbs up.
Yep.
Shane's like, maybe if there's more plot.
If they don't care about the plot.
That's right. It's really funny. I'm just teasing you, Shane. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, no, I'm a maybe on it. I think there's brilliant things to learn, and Martha Wells is a brilliant writer. It was a tough book for me to get into. But again, like the voices are amazing. Yeah. So, all right, I'm gonna stop the recording. We can just hang out a little bit. Thanks for coming on to talk
Thank
about
you.
Murderbot. And I'll put up something in the Slack. We can pick the next book club book this week.